And Europe just doesn't want to recall all these events. Likewise, all the problems related with Joint Comprehension Plan is due to the Western countries who impeded the restoration of the nuclear deal, although in December 2023 Iran was ready to it. So the dismantlement and the derailment of this Joint Comprehensive Plan cannot be a justification in order to blame Iran for withdrawing from the regime, although these requirements are irrelevant. Apart from the attempts, a very destabilizing factor which undermines any efforts to search for negotiation solutions that can eliminate any suspects and with the due consideration of legitimate interests of Tehran. I think we need to prevent further escalation of the nuclear program of Tehran. In June this year will have severe consequences for international peace and security. These actions are beyond the legal framework and encourage other states to exercise abuse. Legitimate states of the parties of the Joint Comprehensive Plan, we condemn this position and we call them to revise their decisions, false decisions, unless they are led to the new tragedy. We are persuaded that this policy, due to confrontation, has no prospects. The main task of today is the resumption of a constructive dialogue between the parties involved and such deep and concentrated collective search of solutions that would help us to avoid another crisis. The Western countries has a chance to make some value by supporting the Russia-China draft resolution at the UN Security Council. As for the technical delay for 6 months in the implementation of the Joint Comprehensive Action Plan and Resolution 2231, hopefully they will take this opportunity and realize all the responsibilities if they refuse to use the pathway of diplomacy. Now is the situation of Ukraine, where the actions of the Western states are quite the same with the actions taken against Iran. The terrorist nature of the Kiev regime, maybe anyone on the West called it the way it is, and we see numerous examples on a daily basis. This is just an overall example of how the center of Europe forms a terrorist cell. The Kiev regime continues to commit terrorist acts against civilians of our country without complete ignorance of those who supply arms to it and funds it. In the last week, the drones hit about 140 civilians, among which 19 were died, including 1 child. 121 was injured, including 8 minor. These are just several facts of the crimes of the Ukrainian army. In Belgorod region on the 23rd of August, the drones in the settlement Repyhovka killed a civilian. On the 24th of August, in this settlement, drone attacked a church. On the 23rd of August, a drone which hit a car in the settlement Krasnaya Yuruga, injuring 2. In Saloti settlement, the drone hit a bus, killing 1 person. In Bryansk region, the security services said that eliminated the diversion group of the special forces of the Ukrainian army. 3 terrorists were eliminated and 3 detained. The combatants planned terrorist acts on the Russian transport infrastructure and admitted they were accomplices in blasting the railway roads in Belgorod region in September 2024. They were trained, and this is very important, and we'll come back to this topic today. They were trained by the UK and Canadian coaches and trainers in Ukraine, Lithuania, Estonia, and Norway. Terrorists shall be punished and prosecuted. And I would like to repeat as to who was the masterminds of these diversions. On the 22nd of August, the drone hit the car in the settlement of Hinel, injuring a man and a woman. On the night of the 22nd of August, the army, the Ukrainian army, hit with drones and MLRS HIMARS, damaging a fuel infrastructure in Donetsk district. On the 23rd of August, in the settlement Kirillovka, a bike drove an explosive device, killing a man and a minor. On the 24th of August, drones attacked the settlement Sveny Transportne, injuring 2 women, a 12-year child and a man. Because of the heat of the car in the settlement Chirovichi, 2 people were injured. In the Volgograd region, the 23rd of August, the drones attacked and one of them hit near a residential building, injuring 3 civilians, including a child. In DPR, on the 21st of August, the drones with the use of long-distance missiles with a shrapnel combat pod and with MLRS HIMARS hit the town of Yinakiv, killing 2 civilians and injuring 21 people, including a child. On the 25th of August, the drone attacked in Gorlivka and injured 4 people in Kursk region. On the 21st of August, due to the shelling of the settlement Sergeyeva, injuring a 54-year-old civilian. On the 22nd of August, because of the explosion of the explosive device during agricultural works in the settlement of Tolpina, injuring 3 women of 36. They are alive but injured, the age of 36, 37, and 48 years. On the 24th of August, high-precision missiles in the residential building, killing and injuring 3 civilians. On the night of the 24th of August, the Ukrainian army tried to attack the Kursk nuclear power station with the drones. The drone was hit, but it exploded, and that led to an arson of the transformator. And Block 3 was out of function on 50%. In LPR on the 21st of August, the drones hit the cities of Kremenna and Lysychansk, killing 2 civilians and injuring 1. The same day in Artyomovsk, the drone attacked the civilian courtyard, killing a woman. In the Republic of Crimea, the 25th of August, the Federal Security Services of Russia prevented a terrorist act against security services of Crimea with the use of explosive device that should have been and was prepared to be put to the Orthodox icon. And we have already told you about such narratives, about these notorious means of warfare is used for a long time by Ukrainians. This was the victim of this fraudulous scheme was a 54-year citizen of the Volgograd region who was just a suicide bomber. Fortunately, this explosive hasn't been blown up, and this terrorist act was prevented. The Kherson region, on the 24th of August, in the Kakhovskaya district, the artillery shell killed a year born in 1997 and a child born in 2014, injuring a man of 1991 and a child 2021. In the city of Alyoshki on the 24th of August, killed 5 people were injured. In Yuzbyurovka, 5 civilians were killed, including a 27-year-old nurse of the ambulance. In the Khersonsk region, only a half of ambulance cars were hit. And we don't see any complaints of these human rights defenders, of all those who profess human rights in the West. they keep silent. On the night of the 22nd of August, the Ukrainian Nazi attacked the pipeline Druzhba, and we'll talk about this later on today. Now, as for this energy infrastructure, it was hit by drones and missiles that impeded to temporary cancellation of oil supply to the region. And the European Commission, in response to the request, stated that Brussels, just think about it, does not see any danger for the EU if the oil supplies stop, oil supplies to Hungary and Slovakia. And I wonder, are you colleagues inside the EU? Now, it seems that you are having friends against each other. It seems that you are not for economy, but for the policy when all those who are inside your structure will feel worse. You cannot exclude the fact that in this acute confrontation with the EU majority with Bratislava, such an approach indeed could have prevailed in the EU functionaries. So, if this was true, this is yet another permission to the Kiev regime to continue its terrorist attacks against critical, important energy infrastructure in the European Union. What is striking more here? Do they want to hear Hungary? All those who on a daily basis claim that they are in solidarity. During an interview of our Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov to an NBC channel, and was released on the 24th of August, just the other day, you can see the script. The show presenter disrupted, and this is their own habit, citing unstated facts. It was allegedly made by Russia during the special military operation in Ukraine. Some cites from the international humanitarian law. No evidence, although there were no evidence, according to good, in quote, traditions. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lavrov sent a letter to the journalist requesting to submit information on the cases referred to. Then the head of our ministry mentioned that the journalist avoided numerous facts of war crimes committed by the Ukrainian army, killing Russian civilians. And we are talking about this every briefing. We tell this on a daily basis with our diplomats on an everyday basis.
The reports of the ambassador of Russia Miroshnik and the member of the public chamber of the Russian Federation Grigoriev about atrocities of the Ukrainian Nazis, as well as linked to videos with proof of military crimes of the Ukrainian soldiers were enclosed. We hope that, given the objectivity that NBC always claim in the covering of important national political developments, the leadership of the channel will show these materials in the air with relevant commentaries. However, it's always been a week, but there have been no comments. Essentially, the TV channel ignored these materials. We would like to know where they plan to publish these materials, for yet again this will show the biasness and propaganda character of covering the Ukrainian crisis in the Western media, including NBC now. But for these crimes that I mentioned, the Kiev regime is not only responsible, but also is punished for crimes in the Kursk region against civilians and Russian soldiers long sentence in prison were given to the Ukrainian soldier Pavel Doshenkov, 16 years. 27 and 14 years in prison were given to terrorists Igor Kim and Nikita Kochera for shelling houses and infrastructure facilities of Mariupol in March-April 2024 that led to the death of 2 people and wounding of 2 more civilians, including underage children. 7 Ukrainian militants were given sentences. Alexander Frodikov, Igor Lizhenko, Denis Voskoboynik received 24 years in prison. Mikhail Ulins, Denis Kolikhaev, Pavel Vovk, Viktor Zhukov received 23 years. As we see what is going on in the run-up of the upcoming anniversaries of the blow-ups of the civil infrastructure, Nord Stream pipelines, we see the actions of those who, for all those years, have not been duly investigating these terror attacks on the civil energy facilities. On August 21st in Italy, on the request of the German General Prosecutor's Office, the former employee of the Ukraine Security Service, he is suspected to be involved in the blow-up on the Nord Stream since September 2024. According to the media, he is also investigated on the involvement of the blow-up of the Sea Jewel oil tanker in February this year. But we will go back to this story later on. Now about the peace process. It is forgotten and remembered once again. What is going on? Zelensky proposed, or it's better to say continued to take steps leading to sabotage of the peace process and escalation of conflict. On August 21st, he told the foreign journalists that Kiev refuses to legally recognize the territories that they lost to be Russian. He doesn't care about the will of the overwhelming majority of people in this region who decided to join Russia following the referendum in 2024. He tried to accuse our country in unwillingness to end the war. He discarded the possibility to grant the Russian language an official status. Instead, he talked about the NATO forces in Ukraine on land, in air, and on sea. In his video address on August 24th, dedicated to the Day of Independence of Ukraine, he continued to demonstrate belligerence. He said that Ukraine will never in history have to be ashamed, as he said, the Russians called a compromise. He ranted about independence that his regime lost long ago. Probably there is a small amount of it, even before Zelensky came to the office, but he lost the remains of it as well. Here's the direct quote. "The future of our country is also up to us," Zelensky said. Today, he said, both the US and Europe agree. Ukraine hasn't yet won, according to Zelensky, but hasn't lost too. I would like to remind you. You have to answer for words. And we should remember what he said in 2024, 2023, 2024, during those sessions of the Rammstein format, at all Munich security conferences, during all these conferences, roundtables, symposiums in Brussels, when they talked about how they inflicted, according to them, a strategic defeat on Russia, and how they were about to win, that the Ukraine was about to win. Probably they should develop one unified idea if the sponsors do it together with Ukraine. And this takes place amid the situation where they send millions of people to be killed and maimed millions of peoples. It takes place amid plunder of the country that long ago lost its sovereignty, and the main thing amid the losses of the Ukrainian army in the front. Zelensky also boasted to the Brussels that Ukraine does not ask but proposes alliance and partnership to the EU. I would like to ask, probably it is high time you answered for your words. Do you remember when Zelensky, together with his regime, defends the European Union, NATO for, according to him, Russia and so on? Probably he should say that he lost it. He wasn't able to do that. It's not a base for Europe against Russia, and they don't defend anyone. It turned out to be hilarious, and the EU a lot can argue with such statements. Oh well, let us talk in these terms. Zelensky not asked, but proposed for more money to be given to him. Negative treatment among the EU countries, especially in the agricultural sphere, is well known. With such a partner, Europeans will face dubious prospects of having stolen armaments and fled Ukrainian Nazis. One more fact here. On August 24th, Zelensky, during the press conference with the Prime Minister of Canada, hinted the preparation of yet another bloody provocation in the DPR. He said that the long-range strikes in Donbass, I quote, very positive results. He also announced some surprises for Russians and hoped that Ukrainian forces will be in Ukraine. The Prime Minister supported this idea, followed up on this idea, and promised to send $500 million for drones within the Pearl program for Ukraine. You know what's surprising? The words. I'm not even talking about body language of Zelensky, but even the words that he uses repeats the words of the heads of the terrorist units of the past. Now about those who sponsor all this. Zelensky continued to ask for more during the contacts with other Westerners. At the meeting with Prime Minister of Norway on August 25th, he said that Ukraine needs some $1 billion monthly to procure American weapons. The Prime Minister promised to Zelensky $8.45 billion in 2025-2026 and facilitation to supply them with 2 Patriot systems together with Germany. He talked about $690 million for air defense system for Ukraine. It will be supplied together with Germany. Defense Ministry of Ukraine, following the visit to Kiev of Defense Ministry of Sweden, said on August 24th that they reached an agreement with Stockholm about the joint production of defense products on each other's territories. Callas kept up with them on August 22nd in the ear of the BBC Today. She said that Russia tries to lure Europe into a trap when it talks about retaining the Ukrainian territories, as she said, in an attempt to justify the further money from the pockets of the Europeans to pump Kiev with weapons. She said once and once again that the most effective security guarantee of Ukraine is the strong Ukrainian army, but it did exist. The Ukrainian army was really strong, but it was destroyed by European bureaucrats with those supplies. Isn't even this evident fact cannot be acknowledged by them? They destroyed everything. They're destroying the Ukrainian people. They continue saying that more weapons for Ukraine will help the country. Security guarantees continued to be mentioned by the aide to the Ukrainian President Podolak. He said that Moscow should know that Ukraine has missiles of smaller range, but also middle and longer range that can hit targets up to 2,000 kilometers away. But every day they have less and less people. First of all, because Brussels and the president of Ukraine kill those people. Second, because people flee the Ukrainian armed forces. Let's look at the statistics. Those are fantastic figures. Only in July this year, the Ukraine saw 17,000 criminal cases because of the abuse of the weapons supplied by the West. No, these are cases on desertment. From January through July, the number exceeded 125 cases, and since the beginning of the armed conflict, they are almost 250,000. According to the unofficial data, about 400 Ukrainians every day leave their positions. It means that every month about 12,000 people leave the front. The total number of deserters since 2022 can reach up to 400,000 people. But they prefer not to talk about this. But we know why. And of course, let's talk about the main narrative that they are discussing right now, that they are started to fantasize about. This is besides the weapon supplies. It's security guarantees. Look at this. Security guarantees were mentioned by Podolak. The same idea was followed on by Ursula von der Leyen. She once again, and I think she's really into zoology. She talked about Ukraine being a porcupine. the more quotes from Ursula von der Leyen we have, the more proof we have. The peace in this paradigm is harmful, and Ukrainian supporters of war will mire more and more in their destructive Russophobe ideology within this, if the situation continues to develop within this logic. Let's talk a little more about the security guarantees. The Western media continue to discuss the scenarios of granting security guarantees to Ukraine. We read a lot there. They propose some peacekeeping contingents after the ceasefire. The stronger military presence of NATO in the Black Sea region, patrols with the NATO forces of the Ukrainian Air Force, stronger militarization of Ukraine. They spread the idea about limiting guarantee countries to the key NATO countries. We believe that these options are lopsided and are aimed at curbing Russia. And this violates the neutral, out-of-bloc and non-nuclear status of Ukraine under 1990 Declaration on State Sovereignty of Ukraine. This also violates indivisibility of security and cements Kyiv's role as strategic provocateur on the Russian borders. This is a tactics described widely in legal literature. They did not come up with anything new. We have a strategic provocateur on our borders. The security guarantees based on the colonial mindset are not such, because they lead to degradation of strategic stability on the regional and global levels. We have to understand that security guarantees is not a condition. It is a result of peaceful settlement based on the removal of the root causes of the crisis in Ukraine that will guarantee security of Russia as well. We believe that, among other things, it should include demilitarization, denazification, neutral, out-of-bloc, and non-nuclear status of Ukraine, recognition of territorial realities, ensuring of rights of Russian and Russian-speaking peoples, and stop and seizure of persecution of the canonic orthodoxy. This should consider the interests of Russia. It cannot turn Ukraine into an animal, and those are words of Ursula von der Leyen. What did she say? She talked about steel porcupine. If she only knew what this really meant, it would be hilarious. This approach to security guarantees that are discussed behind closed doors in the Western media, this leads on the other track and turns the Ukraine into a kind of an animal that will serve as the source of threats not only to Russia and Europe, that will be set against Russia. I'll tell you yet again, this is not our definition. This is the definition that is given by Ursula von der Leyen to Ukraine. This is how the West sees Ukraine in future. For us, Ukraine, as President of our country said, and representatives of our leadership said many times, and is a brotherly nation, is the one nation that is now experiencing a tragedy. It was, for the West, Ukraine is a porcupine, it's an animal.
Let us recall this and remember. Now, as for the new technologies, I think you might think this is just about construction of some new high-tech industries in Ukraine. This is about new oppressive means used by the Kiev regime, which invents new oppressive ways. It was with the submission of the Prime Minister of Ukraine, Yuri Svidenko, which provides for the criminal punishment for the crossing the border and providing huge fines and deprivation of freedom up to 3 years. Political scientists has called and proved that this was a dictatorship in Ukraine and warned about the splash of protest movement once this law is adopted. And what is striking, but we've seen a lot from the Western countries, but here we see a fantastic sight. In Zaporizhia region, the Russian army found the anti-Russia literature published and funded by the EU. Long before the special military operation, these books were stored in the libraries of the region and used to work with the audience of different ages. This was not just legitimate. This was a recommended literature. Let's have a look what these books contain. The books for the youngers contain a pretext of the former head of the EU representative in Ukraine, of Yug Mingarelli. He worked in this capacity between 2016 and up to 2019. There he calls little readers, and I quote, to stand with the European ideas and fight against Russia. I think it's nonsense. What the EU was doing, had been doing between 2016 and 2019. Another block is dedicated to the history where our country is viewed as a threat to a civilized world. Moreover, it is known that in the 90s, the foundation of the Canada-Ukrainian Center of the Krupsky Library in Donetsk, official Ottawa and ambassador of Canada in Ukraine, Francois Matsys, transferred dozens of books of extremist and nationalism, which proves the glorification and applauds in favor of the collaborationist in the Canadian Parliament. That is exactly the same literature they dispatched to back then Ukraine. One of the ambassadors in the library, which republished another set of stories in 1938, found such positive sightings of Hitler and Mussolini on the land, on the Ukrainian soil, where back then had more victims, more than ever any other country, who suffered from Nazism and fascism. It is all in blood there because of Hitler and Mussolini. And now it was supposed by those who held the power in Kiev to positively quote the head of the Third Reich and its accomplices. In the book of Peter Merchuk, Meetings in Israel, Propaganda, Some Insult to the Jews, Insult of Jews. And I think it's quite normal to them to store such books in the library. And all international organizations, funds and agencies, commissions and committees who should have responded to this, they keep silent. And these are the facts to us which reaffirm the relevance of objectives to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine and to eliminate all threats coming from its territory, and all the targets and objectives will be achieved as set by our leadership. And we will continue talking about Ukraine. As you know, on the 17th, 18th and 19th of August, the Ukrainian armed forces at least 3 times with drones attacked the infrastructure, and we briefed about that today, of the Druzhba pipeline. I would like to repeat, it ensures unimpeded oil supplies to East Europe, including to Hungary. Recently, it stopped pumping of oil for several days when there were maintenance works and reconstruction works. And of course, Hungary was indignated, which viewed these actions of Kyiv as an infringement on the sovereignty of the country, and who stated to the European Commission on the flagrant violation by Ukraine of the EU guarantees on non-heating energy infrastructure used for supplying energy to the EU countries. It's not for the first time that we see that the EU agencies just close a blind eye and sacrifice the EU citizens if it infringes and inflicts a defeat to Russia. And I think that's the best word when in Russia you say that I will do quite the opposite to injure myself. In the West, it had a kind of a new meaning and development. This logic is an imperative to them, and they stand ready to sacrifice everything, their own security, their own economy and well-being, and even its citizens, just to damage Russia. There is no adequate response from Europe in terms of this infrastructure derailment. What is surprising is their reaction when they stated that this won't impact energy security and well-being of the EU member states, and that is striking. And the EU Commission, I would like to repeat, should have commented this situation in terms of their own right and own laws. But they not only abstained from commenting the actions of the Kyiv regime, but didn't see any risks for unimpeded supplies, oil supplies to Europe. And they overtly show that some complexities that some European countries feel if they follow the wrong, in perspective of Brussels, policy is not a problem. And that's just a dubious solidarity, European solidarity. Let's remember this, because it proves that the EU always lies, that they act in solidarity with each other. The next step could have been that all the energy strikes are in line with the policy, when in May Europe offered a roadmap how to refuse energy supplies from Russia. But nevertheless, they have not cancelled the laws which view the same acts as terrorist acts. It is obvious that the Brussels and in the Kyiv regime gave a carte blanche to Kyiv regime to hit any energy infrastructure in Russia, and by becoming accomplice to the terrorist actions of Kyiv. Now we are moving on to the topic which is about connected with the current strikes on the energy infrastructure of the Druzhba pipeline. But they happened a long time before, and I'm talking about the investigation, the so-called Western investigation, the strikes on another energy infrastructure, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 gas pipelines. We have raised this topic on many occasions. On the 26th of September, will mark 3 years since the blow-up of Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. And previously, this topic was developed. On the night on the 21st of August, in the Italian province of Rimini, a Ukrainian citizen, Sergei Kuznetsov, was detained, suspected of complicity to the terrorist act, and was known from the Western media and from official press release of this Prosecutor General's Office of Germany. There is an interesting picture. It's not being formed itself, but they make us believe in it. If one Ukrainian with his friends, divers, just blow up just in front of the NATO with all their surveillance aircraft, warships, drones, satellites, the pipeline, so gently and so softly, not touching one of the 4 existing other pipelines, then NATO as an organization which is incapable to ensure its own energy security should be dismissed for incompetence. By the way, the investigation carried out by Brussels, does it understand that they just lost out of their sight all these acts, whether they condemned anyone, maybe someone was dismissed just because of that? That's a very interesting question, I wonder. The Russian side, once it received new information, called for an emergency Security Council meeting, and during the meeting held on the 26th of August, the Russian Federation underlined that Germany and France trying to derail this meeting, avoiding any cooperation with Moscow, unconvincingly referring to confidentiality and non-politicization in this issue. Oh, that's a very interesting case. Just in 2022, President Biden and the State Department and Victoria Nuland stated that they would destroy this energy infrastructure, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. Within a year, within 6 months, they did so. And now they offer to us a non-politicized story. We not politicize it, we qualify it as we should. It was said that this investigation is just a coincidence up to them. It's just to lure away from the facts and cannot establish the full picture and does not give the straight answer to the key question, who is the mastermind and who is the perpetrator. The attempts to shift the blame of the blast of these infrastructure facilities to the non-professional divers without any serious state support to mislead the investigation are just irrelevant. I would like to mention that in line of this policy, the Western countries continue to submit to the UN Security Council insufficient information and ignore its international obligations according to the International Convention on Bomb Terrorism and International Convention on Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism. There is no other alternative. It is critically important to put a full-fledged investigation in order to establish all the perpetrators and bring them to justice. The Russian approaches were shared by the majority of the Global South, which called to the launching of a comprehensive, multilateral and unbiased investigation. I would like to recall that we asked that this investigation be held under the aegis of the UN Secretary General, that it would be comprehensive, that every country gets a clear understanding what is being unfolded, and that the UN Secretary General would understand what's going on with the investigation. But back then, the Western countries just completely ignored this concept. And what they're saying now, they just rehearse the rehearsing their canned speeches. They compliment Berlin for an unbiased work, and they even tried to interrelate the Ukrainian crisis by silencing of those who were masterminds and the perpetrators, ignoring that the situation should be viewed in a comprehensive way. But we see quite the opposite. Who was behind political statements of the leadership of the United States under Biden administration? But the Western preferred the Western countries prefer to keep silence. So this was shown that the Western countries don't have any willingness to have a result-oriented net result. They just make obstacles to the investigation. Here we talk not about just double standards. The repercussions of such a policy can lead to much sadder consequences because it undermines counter-terrorist efforts and can lead and encourage other terrorists that can commit such acts which do not see any adequate response of the West to such crimes and are being encouraged for future crimes. And the West just ignores this fact. If they do not take seriously such terrorist acts on the European soil, they just give a green light to all those who would be willing to commit such terrorist acts. Because likewise, the former terrorists, just of the recent past, these terrorists were encouraged by the West. They were encouraged by impunity, for example, and having a clear understanding that they can be used by the West in order to fight with other countries, acting in line with the rule. The worse feelings of the unwanted states, the better for the West. And this terrible logic can dismantle all those who cherish this ideology in the West. And just a couple of words on the restrictions against Russian speakers. Because in Ukraine, another law was introduced in Ukraine on the national, as they said, memory. The Kiev regime continues to speed up on the anti-Russian narrative. The Verkhovna Rada adopted the law on the basis of the state policy of the national memory of the Ukrainian people, and it develops the so-called decommunization law, which ultimately enshrines neo-Nazism as a state ideology. The new laws introduces an ideology on the formation of the Ukrainian identity as a result, and I quote, the liberation fight against foreign supremacy in the 20th century and war, and I quote, for independence against, and I quote, the Russian aggression starting from the February 12, 2014. And I wonder whether this liberation war was against whom? Maybe against Lenin, who wrote some memoirs on how to develop identity. Now these crimes are being qualified by Ukrainian regime as a proliferation of non-proved information and equated, and I quote, to the Ukrainian propaganda. So if we say that the Western Ukraine developed collaborationism with Nazism, I think that's not just about propaganda, Ukrainian propaganda. I think that all these crimes in Khatyn, all this was committed by the West Ukraine. This is just a historic fact.
The punitive mechanism belongs to a very interesting institution of the historic memory of Ukraine. We will provide you with the links to the materials that we mentioned, that we had prepared about this this institution. In other words, the Kiev bosses has one more tool to fight political opponents. Zelensky tries to erase the people's memory about the contribution of the USSR to the defeat of the Third Reich. They want to destroy tens of thousands of monuments to the Soviet soldiers, fathers, great-grandfathers, great-grandfathers of Ukrainians. They were Ukrainians, they had Ukrainian passports, and felt a spiritual connection with the country. According to the new law, the memory facilities, including the burial sites, cannot have the Soviet and pre-revolution symbols, including the St. George's ribbon, combat standards, and Soviet state words, and as well as the words Great Patriotic War. This is only possible for them when veterans died while turning into steel porcupines. Even in this case, they couldn't have looked the veterans in the eyes. They couldn't have talked to them. They couldn't have continued being their children, great-children and great-grandchildren. Veterans would refuse talking to them. All of this is to be brought to order under the law. In other words, this means the destruction within a year after the law comes into effect. But the word law is not appropriate here. It's anti-law. This so-called law is the same that the Third Reich had. They were abolished with shame. And Germany tried to wash away for many decades after that. This document that shows of the charts hostility against Russia and the Nazi essence of the authorities in Kiev include the glorification of fighters for independence of Ukraine in the 20th century and persons who committed heroic deeds for the sake of Ukraine. This is total nonsense. But that's the law that Ukraine now has. It is clear that these fighters and so-called persons are Banderas, Shchukeviches, Konovaltsev, and are the accomplices to Nazis, traitors of the Ukrainian people. As wild is the new law that equates the state awards to orders and medals of the Belarus Ukraine People's Republic and Ukrainian main Liberation Council under the WION and Ukrainian Insurgent Army. It is like using medals with horns. This is Satanism. We oppose the fact that this new law, Russophobe law, show that the parliamentaries do not want to pursue the peaceful settlement path. We saw the progress following the Russia-US summit in Alaska. And the global majority talked about it and welcomed it. Welcomed such negotiations and meetings. We call on the relevant international structures to analyze this new Ukrainian law and give it the principled evaluation. Everyone has to do that. Now about the situation in Moldova. The last weekend marked an important date, the 81st anniversary of the liberation of Chisinau from German and Romanian invaders that took place during the glorious second Yassi Chisinau offensive of the Red Army. The patriotic forces organized a number of actions. The central event was the large-scale March of Liberation. Only in Chisinau, this event brought together more than 10,000 people. The Moldovan authorities, however, who pursue the policy of historic revisionism and whitewashing Nazi accomplices, ignored this date. President Maia Sandu, following the guidelines for all prospective members of the EU on August 23rd, said anti-Soviet statement, made an anti-Soviet statement dedicated to this anniversary, dedicated to the anniversary of signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. She tried to draw historic parallels with the modern period, that ostensibly some politicians want to involve the country back to the darkness of dictatorship and fear. If she talks about Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, we should remember that it was the last of a similar pact signed by the Westerners. She should remember about Munich agreement and Nuremberg Tribunal and its outcomes. The Moldovans in their comments noted with sarcasm that probably Sandu wrote this post about herself, because it's under her rule that Moldova turned into a totalitarian state, where the power is usurped by a small group of people who work not only the internal Moldovan forces, they work not only into EU integrational forces, they work for the neighboring Romania, because they have Romanian passports. Globally, they work for the Western forces who want to turn Moldova into yet another center for confronting Russia. Ursula von der Leyen already promised to turn Ukraine into one. They have the same plans for Moldova. With the NATO support, the country implements 18 projects aimed at strengthening the defense sector of the country. The budget provides for about 100 million euros in 2024. Over the last 4 years, the Moldovan defense sector received 3.4 billion euros in Western assistance. The list of armaments received from the West include armored fighting vehicles, air defense systems, unmanned systems. To get to know this equipment and to learn to deal with it, the armed forces of Moldova regularly participate in multinational NATO exercises. You should not go far to see more examples. In June, the MPs of the ruling party voted to expand authority of the High Security Council of the country, and now the decisions of the council are obligatory. Another element of consolidation of power in one hand and ensuring reliable area for the Sandu regime is the subjugation of the Constitutional Court for the new judges to give an oath. Even an extraordinary parliamentary session on August 17th took place. All these measures show the attempts of the Moldovan leadership who don't believe that they are able to win at the upcoming parliamentary elections fairly. In case anything goes wrong, they want to help themselves. We draw the attention to the disproportionate, or to say it frankly, frauds with the number of polling stations that are opened outside Moldova. We're talking about it not because we want to interfere with the election, but but because people from Moldova asked us about it. Why Russia has just few polling stations? Not because of Russia's position. We are prepared to give Moldova an opportunity to open as many polling stations as they need. This is the fraud of Sandu, not to open polling stations on the territory of Russia in the necessary numbers. As a response to this policy and the aspiration to retain power, peaceful protests took place all over the country. This cannot be explained by the Kremlin, etc. These are people who are tricked. People in Moldova cannot even vote. Those who don't agree with the regime are threatened, blackmailed, and experience pressure. According to the media, the OSCE representatives saw the abuse of the law enforcers. People in Moldova don't believe what the EU politicians talk about, the officials in Chisinau. They come to Russia in large numbers in the run-up of the elections to show their support to Sandu and her team. According to the public opinion poll on August 20th, more than 50% of respondents think that Moldova moves into the wrong direction. Will the leadership hear the voice of people? We doubt that, because they are of no interest for them. They serve the interests of the West. We received questions about Russia's frozen finance assets. Since 2022, a number of Western countries illegally seized sovereign assets and reserves of the Bank of Russia. They they confiscate them and to send to the Kiev regime. To justify this, they come up with pseudo-legal constructions, providing for the use of profits from the investments of the so-called frozen assets and their transition to various specialized funds. The main part of the assets was frozen on the territory of the EU. Only in 2025, the EU sent 8 billion euros to Kiev. Until the end of the year, they plan to send 10 more billion euros. These profits is a source to pay off credits worth $50 billion that were approved to Ukraine by G7 countries. And this is presented as charity. Any operations with Russian gold reserves without the endorsement of the Russian Federation are illegal. The freeze of assets of the Bank of Russia, as well as steps aimed to seize them, seriously violates the universally acknowledged principles of equality of states and immunity of state property. These actions contradict the UN Charter norms and the provisions of the Convention on Jurisdiction, Immunities of States and Their Property of 2004. They see the central banks as a special category, they cannot be collected. President of Russia called that robbery. Hypocritical attempts to justify these actions with the Russian threat and whatever they use are evaluated as legally void. They don't change the essence of what is going on. That is the conscious violation of the international law. Besides, the current legal framework of the EU makes it possible to seize assets of Russian individuals and legal entities. The total volume of such assets exceeds 28 billion euros. We see the steps as the escalation of the economic aggression and an element of hybrid war waged against Russia. These measures cannot solve the systematic problems of the Western economies that faced stagnation following the sanctions policy. and war. The aspiration to use Russian assets to finance Ukraine shows the ignoring the fundamental international commitments by undermining the confidence to the Western jurisdiction. They create a dangerous precedent. Countries of the global South and East will lose the confidence in the Western finance systems, and the Western countries will have to face more problems with budgetary deficits. These processes expedite the end of the rules-based world order and the establishment of the multipolar architecture of international relations based on sovereign equality and respect of norms of the international law. We reserve the right to take countermeasures in line with international law. We will act based on the reciprocity principle. Now about NATO. We took note of the draft intergovernmental agreement between Italy and Bulgaria on defense cooperation and regarding the joint construction and the use of military facilities, where Italy will have a NATO combat actor group. They plan large-scale development of infrastructure, including construction of new barracks and railways. This is the practical implementation of the plans to increase the number of NATO soldiers in Bulgaria from 1,200 to 5,000, that is, to the brigade level. This confirms that NATO confirms their policy of aggressive, ungrounded militarization of the European continent. This leads to further escalation of military and political situation in Europe and won't help to build more trust in the Black Sea region.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs done a lot with the neo-Nazism, with its anti-neo-Nazism report and glorification of Nazism. And now we see another report drafted by our ministry on this topic. And this report, as you know, is an annual report. And it has the title, a very telling title, on the situation with the glorification of Nazism, proliferation of neo-Nazism, and other practices that fuel the escalation of modern forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. This report is dedicated and coincides with a very important milestone, the 3rd of September, the day of victory of the militaries Japan and the end of the Second World War. The relevance of the topics cited in the report are reaffirmed by increased attempts to falsify and distort the history. I'm talking about portraying aggressors as victims and some other foreign phrases, and it is deploring, and we deplore about the flagrant attitude towards the memory of the victims of Nazism and fascism, and is especially deploring that this happens amid the 80th anniversary, which is widely celebrated globally. The current report is traditionally based on the provisions of the thematic resolution that was co-authored with Russia along with other states, and we annually submit this resolution to the UN Security Council. It is important to mention that the global majority shares our approaches. For example, 119 countries supported the Russian resolution 2024. 53 delegations, including US, UK, Canada, Ukraine, Moldova, and other EU members, voted no. In this regard, we are concerned by a destructive position of the former states of the Nazi axis, which remain as skeptical as for the declaration of Germany, Italy, and Japan for the committed crimes during the Second World War. Right now, the ambassador of France, the ambassador of the United States in France, which is a relative of President Trump, sent a letter, as it was put by the French media, saying that the French government, say, and there is an outrage that the French society just forgets about the Holocaust victims and other manifestations of Nazism. We released an article in the newspaper Izvestia as a response to the problematics and to the issues raised in his statement to the government, to President Macron, by the ambassador of the United States in France. And it's quite obvious when over the last 20 years on the European soil, the Europeans just dismantled the monuments to all those who fought Nazis and fascists. And it is quite a logic behavior who just kept silent on the exhumation of the burial sites of all those who sacrificed their lives during the Second World War on the side of the anti-Hitler coalition. Their behavior is quite logic. They just ignored how the monuments and memorial plates are being dismantled and tombs are desecrated, the tombs to those who stopped the Holocaust. I think their behavior are quite logic. The behavior of those who did not invite the veterans of the Second World War to the events related with the liberation of the victims of the concentration camps. Now these veterans are refused and are of invitation, and their behavior is quite logic. Yesterday they forgot about the heroes of the Second World War, and today they forget about the victims of the Holocaust. If you want to commemorate the victims of the Holocaust, you should restore the memory of the heroes of the Second World War. And I'm talking about the overall conception that history cannot be rewritten. And switching up to report, we see that the Nazi ideas are being revived once again. It is deploring that the governments of some anti-Hitler coalition states desecrate the memory of soldiers who sacrificed lives in the fight against fascism. On the pathway and the glorification of Nazism, some states just shifted its approaches, justifying the Nazi regime and equating it with the totalitarian Soviet regime and trying to shift the blame for unleashing the war. And it's difficult to believe that they're shifting the blame to the Soviet Union, charging it with the crimes more terrible than crimes committed by the Third Reich. Over recently, this justification of Nazism was just a form of policy to counteract Russia's special military operation. Whitewashing of Nazism and its recent accomplices has become a form of support of the current supporters of the Nazi regime in Kiev. Moreover, they take attempts to equate European values with the glorification of Nazism that was showed by some accomplices to the Nazis. They get privileges and benefits and even permission to impose the standards of the so-called true democracy glorified in Brussels. The most alarming situation is being seen in the Baltic states in Ukraine, who glorify anti-Nazism, encourage anti-Russia narrative, and other acts, criminal acts. Poland, Czech, we see the same picture. The anti-rating is being expanded with the inclusion of my son in Moldova. The Western countries who put a blind eye on the xenophobia in their countries, which mask the results and the manifestation of racism and that trigger outrage among the nations of the Global South as well. These countries just fix and enshrine the ideology of Nazism and using artificial intelligence. And the trends of this report just reaffirm that Russia confirms its topic that any manifestation, racial manifestation, directly threats the fundamental values of true democracy and human rights, represents a serious challenge to international and regional security and stability. Russia, along with like-minded states, won't tolerate such racist and neocolonial approaches and will vigorously resist it. We will take whatever we can so that the deed of millions of heroes who liberated the world from Nazism and fascism 80 years ago won't become under oblivion. On the 25th of August, there was an awarding ceremony of the laureates of the fourth competition, Architecture of Diplomacy, organized by Glava PDK of Russia. This was coincided with the 80th anniversary of the victory and was held under the aegis Diplomacy Through Ages and become especially significant, which brought together works from young artists from CIS states. This competition has become international for the first time this year. Austria, Belarus, Zambia, Kazakhstan, Moldova, Nicaragua, Netherlands, Syria, the United States, Turkey, and Uzbekistan took part in this competition. It is worth mentioning that the laureates were young people from Russia, Belarus, Georgia, and Nicaragua, whose works reflected the role of diplomacy in the current realities. The Diplomatic Academy held a knowledge-sharing meetings, architecture of diplomacy. I would like to bring your attention to the facts that on the Gogolevsky Boulevard in Moscow, you can see the exposition of those laureates, and you can give your vote for any work in the nomination of the Choice Award. I can say that this event showed the effectiveness of the cultural diplomacy and art as an instrument to strengthen mutual understanding, cultural exchange between the nations. In Artek, there was held and finalized the competition of School of Life, which was held between August 25th and 21st and 25th, organized by the Ministry of Sport and the Russian Football Union, and has become the third international program in the 2025, which aims to strengthen ties between the youth. This year, this fest has become an international. It brought together more than 2,000 children from 47 countries, including Morocco, Palestine, and Uzbekistan, and other states. The program of festival was packed, and apart from football matches between the teams, all the children had participated in workshops held by renowned sportsmen and athletes who shared their knowledge with their expertise and love to sports. The peculiarity of the festival was marked by the expansion in terms of education and culture. There were held quizzes, for example, with the participation of Olympic champions, as well as workshops and art ateliers. The festival was culminated by a concert and a prize-awarding ceremony for all the participants. We are persuaded that these projects bring value to the development of international humanitarian cooperation, bringing together all the children of the world. The fourth Kazan Youth Summit is being held in Kazan, being participated by the sports ministry of many countries. Kazan will bring together representatives from Brazil, Bangladesh, Qatar, Colombia, Mexico, Nigeria, UAE, Oman, Saudi Arabia, the Philippines, South African Republic, and many other countries. The main topic of the summit is the education of personality amid global changes, values, and professional way. During the summit, there will be discussed artificial intelligence and its impact on current education, the expansion of international association of youth organization, the development of the network of school clubs, of the diplomacy, the movement of the first. Joint initiatives on education will be held as well. A special place is dedicated to the festival Unity in Diversity. Through cultural diversity of Tatarstan and other performances of artists, workshops, and of course national cuisine, the summit is held with support of the Minister of Education of Russia, the government of Tatarstan, the Kazan Federal University. Co-organizers is the movement of the First, the Academy of the Youth Diplomacy, and the Youth Center of the Republic of Tatarstan. On the 31st of August, Trinidad and Tobago celebrates the Independence Day. In 1962, the country liberated from the colonial metropoly, and within a few years, on the 1st of August 1976, has become a republic. Amid the expansionist policy and neocolonial policy of the West pursued by the West, we welcome the commitment of Trinidad to get liberated from the colonial past. The society now debates about the refusal from recognizing of the Court of Great Britain and delegating its authority to the Caribbean Court. Our diplomatic relations had been started on the 6th of June in 1974, and the official visit that took place between June 30th and July 17th, 1975, of the Prime Minister of country, Eric Williams. We commend the level of bilateral relations that are built on the mutual respect of interests. We are looking forward to further strengthening of cooperation, trade, economic, scientific, cultural, and humanitarian exchanges to intensify interaction on the international platforms, including the Forum of Gas Exporting Nations, for the benefit of our people and in order to form a more just and multipolar global world order. And of course, we wish the people of Trinidad and Tobago prosperity, peace, and progress. On the 1st of September 2025, Kaliningrad will open the park of miniatures and dedicated to the start of the Second World War. This meeting will be attended by the National Center of Historic Memory to the President of the Russian Federation, the member of the Public Chamber of the Russian Federation, Madam Malышeva, along with the Marshal of the Soviet Union, Mr. Konev, and General of the Army, Vatutin. This park, the Solved Europe, is a unique historic landscape with a core landmark as the map of the East Europe, which reflects 7 monuments on the heroes, liberators, who were dismantled in a number of European states, among them the monuments in Prague, Warsaw, Kiev, Riga, Klaipėda, Tartu, and Sofia. This project is our response to a deliberate policy to distort historic truth and attempts to revise the decisive role of the Red Army and the Soviet Union in the victory over Nazism. The liberation of Europe has become possible due to sacrifices of our heroes, which claimed the heroes, about 1 million Soviet soldiers whose deed, which solved the Europe from extermination, must be kept in memory by the current and future generations. And this opening of the park is not just a tribute to the memory of the deed, but also an important initiative to preserve the historic memory and to counteract the attempts to revive Nazism in Europe. And the fact that it's not just gaining momentum in the Western Europe, but even goes through the streets, marches, not officially, but it's marches in the streets and in the lanes, and this is a fact. Yet another important landmark event and a number of events in line with the agreements agreed by the UK, France, and Germany, the Soviet Union denounced the pact with Japan, and on the 8th of August 1945, it declared war to Japan, which denied to surrender. The statement of the Soviet Union said that after the surrender, Japan was left the only power that was for prosecuting the war. As a result of decisive actions of the Red Army in the Manchuria offensive, the Kwantung Army was defeated, surrendered, and disarmed. In the morning of the 2nd of September 1945, on board of the American ship Missouri, which was in the Tokyo Bay, an act of surrender of Japan was signed, and which meant the end of the Second World War. Along with the Japanese side, was signed by the UK, the US, China, France, the Netherlands, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. On behalf of the Soviet Union, it was signed by Lieutenant General Mr. Derevyanko, the head of the Chief Command of the Soviet forces in the Far East, under the Supreme Command of the Allied powers in the Pacific. The act proclaimed the endorsement by Japan of the Potsdam Declaration. The US, China, and UK, joined by the Soviet Union. The Japanese government was obliged to honor the conditions of the Potsdam Declaration, to give decrees and orders of the declaration that might be requested by the Supreme Commander or any other representative assigned and appointed by the Allied powers. Japan was taken under control of the Allied powers, and thus putting an end to the bloodiest episode in the world history unleashed by Hitlerists and militarists, along with the militarist Japan. This act of surrender has become a milestone of the post-world order, with its fundamental principles enshrined in the UN Charter. With the cornerstone of this system is unconditional recognition, full recognition of the results of the Second World War. The 3rd and 6th September, Vladivostok will host the 10th Anniversary Economic Forum. It has reaffirmed the participation of more than 70 states. Over the last 10 years, this forum brought value and recognized as a requested forum to expand international cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region. Today, the forum is one of the leading platforms for those who are keen on depoliticized communications between academia, business communities on how to develop the Asia-Pacific region. This forum is being marked by the mutually beneficial dialogue, by a uniting agenda and correctness. We see that many countries from the global south are keen to participate, as well as along with China, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Mongolia, the Republic of Korea, and Japan to participate in this forum. Let me recall, we were talking about this in 2024. More than 7,000 guests from 75 countries participated in this forum. Most numerous delegations were sent by China, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Myanmar. The forum is an intersection of representative regional and global structures such as EEU, ASEAN Dialogue on Cooperation in Asia, as well as BRICS and ESCATO. So this Vladivostok platform cements this such inter-platform cooperation. The slogan of the current forum, Far East for Prosperity and Peace. The agenda provides for the international cooperation in the changing world, ensuring economic growth through investments, innovations, integration, the formation of new logistic chains, technological changes, urban planning, the development of the Russian Far East and its place in the region. Of course, there will be separate discussions on the role of the youth in shaping the overall future of the Asia-Pacific.
According to the practice of the forum business dialogues on trade and economic issues between Russia and China, India, Laos, Mongolia, Myanmar, Thailand, and ASEAN will take place on the sidelines of the forum, the Third International Forum, the Day of the Falcon on September 3rd, and 14th Educational Task Conference will take place. As per usual, Foreign Ministry of Russia facilitates the forum. We will provide you with the links to the event, to the website of the